did report experiencing sexual desire at some level.
Wait, really? The majority, even within the asexual group?
Yep, which, it immediately challenges that simple no desire stereotype.
Welcome to the Sex Science Podcast, where we turn the latest peer-reviewed research on intimacy and sexuality into fun, accessible conversations. Generated by AI and fact-checked by experts, the Sex Science Podcast was created by LaShaw to empower you through knowledge. So, join us as we explore pleasure, relationships, human connection, and everything in between.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a topic that's often, let's say, surrounded by a lot of assumptions. We're talking about sexual desire and erotic fantasies, specifically within the ACE spectrum. So that's people identifying as asexual, demisexual, gray-asexual, or maybe questioning where they fit. And we're grounding this in some solid research, a pretty big study actually, published 2024 in the Archives of Sexual Behavior. It's called Deepening Sexual Desire and Erotic Fantasies Research in the ACE Spectrum. Looked at over 1,000 Italian volunteers across these groups. So our mission here is to really unpack what this study found, to get beyond those kind of simple stereotypes about the ACE spectrum and see the real diversity there based on the actual data.
Exactly. And maybe just quickly define those groups. So asexual folks generally recognize they don't experience sexual attraction to others. Demisexual typically means no sexual attraction unless there's a strong emotional bond first. Gray-asexual means maybe feeling sexual attraction, but really rarely. And then questioning is, people exploring their identity within that whole spectrum.
Okay, perfect. So straight away, this study kind of pushes back against that really common idea, right? That being ACE means zero interest in anything sexual, period.
Totally. The research paints a much more nuanced picture.
Which is needed.
Definitely. And a key goal was also providing data comparing these groups. That's super useful, especially for, say, clinicians working with ACE individuals. They need to get this complexity.
Makes sense.
So let's dive into the findings then. Okay, so overall desire levels. Yes, all the ACE groups reported lower desire compared to typical allosexual population.
Right, people who do experience sexual attraction.
Exactly. And this is really key. The majority of participants right across the ACE spectrum did report experiencing sexual desire at some level.
Wait, really? The majority, even within the asexual group?
Yep, which, it immediately challenges that simple no desire stereotype.
Huh. So how did that, show up in what people actually do?
Okay, that's where it gets even more interesting. The study found the asexual group reported less partnered sexual activity. Makes sense, right?
Yeah, follows from the definition.
But, and here's the twist, there was no significant difference across any of the groups when it came to things like masturbation or using porn, solitary activities.
Wow. No difference there.
None statistically significant. So it suggests this split maybe between desire for others versus desire or activity experienced, individually.
Okay, that partnered versus solitary split feels like a really big piece of the puzzle. So what about the actual levels of desire? How did the groups compare there?
Right. They measured desire in a bunch of ways. Not just how much overall, but things like desire for oneself, autoerotic desire, or desire within a relationship, what they call dyadic desire, or even just responsive desire to seeing someone attractive. And a clear pattern emerged. The asexual group consistently scored significantly lower than the other ACE groups on pretty much all those different dimensions.
Lower across the board for asexuals, okay.
But then, the demisexual participants, they generally showed the highest scores on most desire types within the ACE spectrum studied.
Highest for demisexuals. That tracks with the emotional bond aspect, maybe.
It seems to align, yeah. Especially when you look at specific types like dyadic desire within a couple. Asexuals were lowest, demisexuals were highest.
In the gray and questioning folks.
They were generally somewhere in the middle. For dyadic desire specifically, gray asexuals were lower than demisexuals, and the questioning group too. So a definite spectrum of experience even within the spectrum.
Fascinating. Okay, that's desire levels sorted. What about fantasies? Did the pattern hold for how often people fantasize or how important fantasies are?
Pretty similar story for fantasy frequency and importance, actually. The asexual group scored significantly lower than the others on both counts. Less frequent, less important assigned.
Okay.
But here's another interesting bit. The questioning group scored significantly higher than the other groups, specifically on the importance they gave to fantasies.
Higher importance for the questioning group. That seems counterintuitive at first glance. Any thoughts on why?
Well, the study doesn't say for sure, but you could speculate, right?
Yeah.
If you're actively questioning and exploring your identity around attraction and desire, maybe fantasies become this really important space, like a place to explore possibilities, figure things out.
That makes a lot of sense, using fantasy almost like a mental sandbox for identity.
Kinda, yeah.
So what about the content? What were people actually fantasizing about? Any surprises there?
Okay, content.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the asexual group tended to score lower on most fantasy themes compared to the others.
Most, but not all.
Right. The exception was taboo fantasies. No significant difference between the groups there, interestingly.
Huh, okay.
Now, the demisexual group, fitting their profile, showed a significantly higher frequency of romantic fantasies compared to the asexual and gray-asexual groups. That focus on connection really comes through.
Yeah, that aligns nicely.
And the questioning participants, they reported higher scores on things like physical or contextual fantasies, and also stuff like seduction or infidelity themes, compared to the asexual group and sometimes the demisexual group, depending on the specific theme.
Lots of variation then. But wasn't there one finding about the most common fantasy themes that really stood out? Something maybe less explicitly erotic than people might assume?
Yes. This was honestly one of the most striking details in the whole paper. When you looked at the two most frequent fantasies reported across all groups, asexual, demisexual, gray-asexual, questioning, all of them.
Yeah, what were they?
Caressing and hugging and kissing a partner.
Cuddling and kissing, those were the top two.
Across the board, yeah. The most frequent.
Wow. That really does make you rethink what falls under the umbrella of erotic fantasy, doesn't it? Maybe it's much more about intimacy for many people.
It absolutely suggests that. It broadens the definition considerably.
Okay, let's shift to the emotional side. How did people feel about their desire or their lack of it? Was it causing distress?
This is another really important finding, especially for understanding the lived experience. The asexual group reported significantly low scores on negative feelings about sexual desire.
So for most, not experiencing sexual attraction wasn't inherently upsetting.
Exactly. It reinforces the idea that asexuality itself isn't a disorder or something inherently negative for the person experiencing it. It's just their orientation.
Right.
But on the flip side, the questioning group reported the highest scores for negative feelings about desire and also negative emotions linked to their fantasies.
Highest negative feelings in the questioning group. Why might that be?
The researchers suggest it could be tied to that very process of questioning. The uncertainty, maybe monitoring yourself internally, comparing yourself to others or to stereotypes. That whole process can understandably lead to distress or confusion if your feelings aren't clear-cut or don't fit in neat boxes.
That makes total sense. Figuring out identity is rarely straightforward. Did the study mention any, specific patterns in how asexual people experience fantasy?
It did touch on some qualitative insights mentioned in the discussion. Things like some asexual participants reporting they weren't necessarily the main character in their own fantasies, or fantasizing about fictional characters, or people without distinct features. This links to a concept sometimes called autocorosexualism, which is basically a disconnect between the self and the fantasy content, like watching a movie rather than being in it.
Interesting. Is that unique to asexual people?
Well, that's the crucial point the researchers made. While it's been discussed in relation to asexuality, there actually isn't research confirming it only happens in asexual people. It might be more common there, but we don't know for sure if allosexual people sometimes experience this too. Needs more study.
Good clarification. Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. Taking all these findings together, what's the big picture takeaway from this study about the ACE spectrum, and why does this matter?
I think the number one takeaway has to be the sheer heterogeneity, the diversity. The ACE spectrum isn't one single thing. It's a wide range of experiences when it comes to desire and fantasy.
It's not a monolith.
Not at all. And that's crucial information, especially for clinicians, therapists, even just for society generally. This data helps move away from pathologizing ACE identities. It shows you can't just assume someone on the spectrum has zero interest in any kind of sex. Remember that solitary versus partnered finding. And it really underscores that ACE people can, and often do, have rich inner lives, value intimacy, want relationships, even if conventional sexual attraction isn't the driving force.
Right. So, to sum up our deep dive, this research really highlights the complexity. Low or absent sexual attraction to others is the defining feature, yes. But beyond that, the experiences of desire, fantasy, intimacy, and emotion within the ACE spectrum are incredibly varied. It definitely breaks down those simple, often inaccurate stereotypes.
Precisely. And of course, like any good study, it points towards needing more research. The authors noted limitations. The sample relied on self-reports. They call for more qualitative work, digging into personal stories, and studies with more diverse groups globally.
Always more to learn.
Always. Which brings us maybe to a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Given all this diversity we've talked about within the ACE spectrum, and especially that finding that fantasies about cuddling and kissing are so frequent across all these groups, what does that suggest about how we as a society even define sexual desire? How much of what we call sexual might actually be more about intimacy, connection, or even just internal sensation and imagination, separate from attraction to someone else?
Thank you for listening to the Sex Science Podcast brought to you by LaShaw. We hope that you learned something new about the wonderful world of human intimacy and sexuality, and join us next time as we dive into more fascinating research. And remember, science is for you. Music for this podcast was produced by SOUNDRAW.